everybody, I'm Richard Holdner and welcome to the channel. Let's suppose the following. You want to build a Turbo LS. Maybe it's your first one. Maybe you're new to all this and you have questions. Because let's face it, everybody has questions. You know, what's the best camshaft to use? What's the best turbo to use? What size motor should I use? What about injectors? Sometimes you're asking the wrong questions. But Richard, what are the right questions? Well, here they are. Okay guys, congratulations, you have decided I'm going to do a Turbo LS. Now, what's the best camshaft to use? What's the best intake manifold? What are the best cylinder heads? What's the best turbo? Yada, yada, yada. You shouldn't be asking those questions. As we indicated earlier, the first question you should ask yourself if you want to do a Turbo LS, and this will help dictate all of the other things. The first important question you need to ask is, how much power do I want to make? That's going to determine a lot of stuff. So be realistic. Yes, we all want 5,000 or 10,000 or 15,000 horsepower, but that's not realistic. How much power do you want to make for the thing that you want to do? Is this going to be a street-driven combination? Is it going to be a street strip? Is it a drift car? Is it a drag race car? Is it a pro mod car? Is it a no prep car? Whatever it is, decide how much power you want to make, and please, don't say as much as possible. As much as possible! Figure out a realistic amount of power that you want to make, then that's going to help us decide all of the other things. If you want to make 1,000 horsepower, that's great. If you only want to make 500, you want to make 1,500, whatever that number is, decide how much power you want to make. Now we can pick out and decide how to do it. Congratulations, you've taken your first step. You have decided how much power you want to make. Let's say you want to make 1,000 horsepower. Now let's figure out how you actually make 1,000 horsepower, starting with the motor that you're going to choose. Maybe you already have one. You have a 4.8, a 5.3, a 6.0, a 6.2, a 7 liter, some kind of stroker. If you have one already, you've kind of already decided which combination you're going to use. If not, and you're going to go to the wrecking yard and grab something, you're going to pick a 4.8, 5.3, 6.0. Those are going to be the most common. You could also go with one of the aluminum versions or a stroker variant thereof. But the thing is, now that you've decided how much power you want to make, what's the best way to go about that? Well, the lucky thing is for LS owners is if you want to make, let's say, 1,000 horsepower or less, even if you want to make more than that, you can start out with either a 4.8, a 5.3, a 6.0, really any of the factory displacements, because you can make that kind of power with any of those motors. With each one of them, it just takes more boost, because each larger displacement will make more NA power. It takes less boost for you to reach 1,000 horsepower. You can do it with a 4.8, you can do it with a 5.3, you can do it with a 6.0. Go to the wrecking yard, pick out your favorite motor, and bring it home and add boost to it. But here are some things to consider. If you want to make 1,000 horsepower, it's going to be a lot easier to do with a bigger motor. A bigger motor not only makes more power starting out, it makes more power after we've added our turbo camshaft and our turbo cylinder heads and our turbo intake manifold, even if we don't change any of those. It starts out making more power. So therefore, not only is it going to take less boost to achieve our desired power level, it's also going to be more responsive getting there. So if you're trying to make 1,000 horsepower with a 4.8 and we have our 1,000 horsepower turbo that we're eventually going to choose, the 4.8 is going to make that turbo less responsive than it would if you had a 5.3 or a 6.0. So when you're choosing the motor combination that you want to make your desired power output, think about that going in. Pick the bigger one, it's going to be more responsive, or pick the smaller one, because you like to rev and you want to run a lot of RPM. Whatever you decide, all of those motors can make 1,000 horsepower if that's what you want. If your number is less than that, obviously choose accordingly. If it's more than that, obviously choose accordingly. But choose the motor that you want to use, and know this. Remember, bigger motors make more power at a lower boost and are more responsive. Okay guys, we've decided how much power we want to make, and we've also decided what motor we're going to use to make that power. That's good, because that's now going to help us decide what camshaft we run. You see, the motor that we picked and our decided power output is going to determine the best camshaft. That super cool turbo camshaft that we're going to pick to make our 1,000 horsepower or 700 or 1,500, whatever your number is. But it's going to help us decide what camshaft to use. And here's what you need to think about when you're choosing a cam for your Turbo LS. The first thing that you need to do is forget all about it being a turbo motor. That's right. Forget about your turbo camshaft. Well, when you're choosing your turbo camshaft, forget about it actually being a turbo motor and think about it as a naturally aspirated motor. And here's why. You need to pick the camshaft to help you have the things that you want. Drivability, idle quality, fuel mileage, and in case of a turbo application, boost response. And that's a critical element because all of these camshafts, you could make 1,000 horsepower with a stock cam. It'd be hard, but you could. It'd just take 1,000,000 pounds of boost to do it because the stock cam doesn't make very much power. It's not uncommon for you to do a camshaft upgrade and even on a low or medium boost LS and pick up 150 horsepower or even more. And it's fairly easy to do. So my point is you want to choose the camshaft that operates in the RPM range that your motor is working at and offers the combination of things that you want. Do you want to use the stock converter? Do you want good idle speed or idle quality and drivability and those kinds of things? Also, when you're picking a turbo combination, if you have your 1,000 horsepower combination, you're 5.3 and you want to make 1,000 horsepower, pick a camshaft that will help you make 1,000 horsepower. You don't need a big cam for that. Luckily for the LS stuff, you can pick a mild or small camshaft that offers good boost response on our 1,000 horsepower turbo, but will also easily allow you to max that turbo out, meaning you can make 1,000 horsepower with a small camshaft that also offers good boost response. And that's very, very important. Of course, you could also put a stage 2 turbo cam or a stage 3 turbo cam, and it will also make 1,000 horsepower with your 1,000 horsepower turbo. It just won't be as responsive down low. Congratulations, you've come a long way. You've decided how much power you want to make. You've decided the motor that you're going to use because you've gone to the wrecking yard and chosen your desired LS, and you've chosen your camshaft. But in reality, I would have chosen maybe the turbo before the camshaft, but let's talk about choosing the proper size turbo. Here's what I like to do. You've decided how much power you want to make. And so that's going to determine your choice of turbo. If you want to make 1,000 horsepower, you're going to choose from the available 1,000 horsepower turbos. If you only need to make 700, you'll choose from the 700 horsepower turbos, or 400 or 500, or whatever your number is. But that's going to limit the number of choices that you have based on that available power output. Here's my advice. If you decide that you want a 1,000 horsepower turbo, pick a turbo that might be a little bit more than that. Because what's going to happen is you're going to run 20 pounds of boost, you're going to make 1,000 horsepower and go, you know what? You know what'd be better than 20 pounds and 1,000 horsepower is like 25 pounds. Then you'll want to step up your turbo, you'll have to replace it. So I would always advise, pick a turbo that's going to do a little bit more than you actually think that you're never going to use, because you will. Here's the other thing. If you want to make 1,000 horsepower, the smallest turbo that you get that makes 1,000 horsepower is also, not coincidentally, going to be the most responsive one. So the cool thing about adding a turbo to a motor is it makes a lot of power. But an even cooler thing is if the combination works real well, like, on the street. These are things that you can help with a high stall converter and the camshaft that we talked about that added low speed power, and using the bigger motor so that it would spools the turbo up. Because having a turbo is cool, but having a nice responsive one that drives around and spools up nicely down the street is even better. Because the only thing better than enjoying the boost is enjoying the boost early and late and in the middle. That's kind of awesome. So choose the turbo for your desired power level, maybe add a little bit to that, and then start working on the little things on the turbo. What should I do on the hot side? Should I maybe make the hot side a little bit smaller to make it more responsive? I should have adjusted my camshaft to tailor to my turbo. All of these things are interrelated, and make sure to think about all of them when you're choosing your turbo and your motor size and your camshaft. Very quickly, we are going to cover cylinder heads and intake manifold for your typical first-time turbo LS. The nice thing about that is you don't have to change either one of those. If you're looking at a turbo motor to make 1,000 horsepower or less, keep the stock heads that you have, whatever you have. They could be 317s, 706s, 799s, 243s, 241s, whatever you have, those heads will support that amount of power and actually a bit more than that. So don't worry about the cylinder head. Do a camshaft, do valve springs, and the same thing with the intake manifold. Whether you have an LS1, LS6, LS2, the LS3 stuff also works on the larger motor, but the truck manifold, the Trailblazer SS, all of those intake manifolds will easily support 1,000 horsepower and more. They'll also work in the RPM range where you're more than likely going to be running this motor. So cylinder heads, keep them up to 1,000 horsepower. Intake manifold, keep it up to 1,000 horsepower. Now let's take a look at our final thing, injectors. So the very last thing I'm going to cover on the most commonly asked questions on your first Turbo LS are injectors. A lot of people are confused by injector size and what they actually do. I've even had a lot of people ask me, hey Richard, can I use stock injectors when I do my turbo motor? It's like asking when I put a camshaft in it, I don't need to have it tuned, right? No, you do need to have it tuned when you put a camshaft in it. And if you're going to be upping the power significantly, by adding a turbo, which can easily add 30, 40, 50, or even 100% of power, you're going to need bigger injectors. You're going to need bigger injectors because you're making more power, and quite possibly you might also be changing fuel. So if you're going from gas to E85, very common on turbocharged and supercharged combinations, the E85 requires more fuel. I'm going to go ahead and put up a little matrix here to show you what's going on. But basically, I've listed this in injector size, basically in pounds per hour, because injector flow rates are done that way. So if we take a look at our first one, we've got 25-pound injectors, kind of a common size for your typical LS. We know that 25-pound injectors can support like 400 horsepower naturally aspirated. If we move over to our next column, because we have to run the fuel richer when we're running a turbo, we're not running at 13 to 1 or 12.5 to 1. We're now running at 11.5 to 1. We need to run it richer. It requires more fuel. So the amount of power that it can support with that same amount of fuel flow will be less. To give you an idea, 25-pound injectors are going to support about 340 horsepower under boost. And with E85, it requires even more fuel because it's about 25 or 30%. In my multiplier here, I've actually added about 25% more fuel. So with E85, 25-pound injectors in your Turbo LS will really only support 255 horsepower, kind of less than the stock motor would make anyway. So we have to go up in injector size. So if we step up to like let's say a 50-pound injector, we know, simple math, we should be able to double the amount of power that we can supply now. So on a naturally aspirated motor, our 50-pound injectors could support as much as 800 horsepower, actually a little bit more because the brake specific number is going to be even lower on a naturally aspirated motor, but we won't get into that. On our turbo combination, 50-pound injectors will support near 680 horsepower, and with E85, only 510 horsepower. That's why we need to go up even bigger in injector size on our turbo stuff if we're running E85. To put this into perspective, 100-pound injectors will support 1,600 horsepower on your naturally aspirated LS. Good luck making 1,600 horsepower or needing that big of an injector on your naturally aspirated LS. But if you do, you have the right injector size for it. But as always, on a boosted application, our 100-pound injectors will support 1,360 horsepower on gas and just about 1,000 horsepower on E85. So let's step it up even further to 200-pound-an-hour injectors, 2,000 cc's, right in that range. We see that we can support over 3,000 horsepower on our natural aspirated LS. On a turbocharged motor running gas, we can support 2,700 horsepower, and running E85, we can support over 2,000 horsepower with our 200-pound-an-hour injectors. And obviously, you can use the math anywhere in between there. That's why I went from 25 to 50 to 100 to 200-pound injectors, and there's a lot of stuff in between all of that. Let's get to our conclusion. Okay, guys, hopefully the list of commonly asked questions on your very first Turbo LS is helpful to you. Remember, always start with how much power do I want to make? And then you're going to take a look at the motor that you want to do it with. Then you'll take a look at the other things because the amount of power that you want to make is going to dictate a lot of things. For instance, the turbo size, which is going to help you with a camshaft choice. The power output's definitely going to dictate things like injector and pump. And then, as we said, a lot of the other things aren't really going to matter. The intake manifold, the cylinder heads, just get a cam and springs and boost and you're on your way. I'm Richard Holder. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. Make sure to join me live nightly, 7 o'clock Pacific Standard Time for our live feed if you have even more questions.